The dust never settled on Outpost 7, a forgotten trading station where the galaxy's unwanted were bought and sold like scrap metal. Among the crates of broken machinery and dying livestock, a human mechanic with calloused hands and a heart too soft for this world made a choice that would shatter everything the Empire believed about mercy. He bought a blue-skinned alien girl her own mother had declared worthless, a child who had never spoken a single word in her 12 years of life. But that night, when the twin moons rose over his workshop and the stars leaned close to listen, she opened her mouth and sang a song that should not exist. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode will leave you speechless. Trust us, you won't want to miss what happens next. The market stretched like a wound across the desert floor, canvas tops flapping in wind that tasted of iron and regret. Outpost 7 had no beauty to offer, only function, a place where ships stopped when they had nowhere else to go. The stalls sold everything the galaxy discarded, engine parts that still sparked with half-life, foodstuffs past their safety dates, clothing stained with stories no one wanted to hear. And at the eastern edge, beneath a canopy bleached gray by 3 suns, they sold the living. Owen Tracker wiped grease from his knuckles with a rag that had given up on cleanliness years ago. His jumpsuit hung loose on a frame built by labor, shoulders wide from lifting, hands scarred from touching things too hot or too sharp. He had come for a fuel converter, maybe a coil if the price was honest. He had not come for this. The Arkelian woman stood on a platform of stacked crates, her skin the deep violet of a bruise, her forearms gesturing in the theatrical desperation of someone trying to sell smoke. Beside her stood a child, small, silent, blue as winter ice. The girl's eyes were too large for her face, her dress too thin for the wind. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at nothing. Defective, the mother announced, voice carrying across the market with practiced projection. Cannot hear, cannot speak. Useless for labor, useless for trade. I sell her cheap to any fool willing to feed dead weight. The crowd murmured with the particular cruelty of those who had been discarded themselves and sought comfort in discarding others. A Thraxian merchant laughed, mandibles clicking. Another shook his head and moved toward a stall selling plasma coils. Owen's hands stilled on the rag. His throat tightened in a way that made breathing feel like a choice he had to remake with every second. 50 credits, someone offered, voice bored. The mother's face twisted. 70. Owen stepped forward before his brain caught up with his feet. His voice came out quiet, but it carried weight the way stone carries weight, inevitable and immovable. 200, he said. The crowd turned. The mother's eyes sharpened with the gleam of someone who had not expected fortune, but would seize it with both hands, and several more. The Arkelian woman smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone unburdening herself of shame and calling it profit. Sold, she said. Owen led her through the market, with his hand hovering near her shoulder, never touching, never pushing. She followed at a distance that felt like mistrust made physical, her bare feet silent on the gravel paths between stalls. He did not speak. What could he say to a child who could not hear him? What comfort lived in words that died before reaching their destination? The workshop squatted at the edge of the outpost like something ashamed of itself, corrugated metal walls patched with whatever Owen could weld when the wind tore holes through them. Inside, it smelled of oil and ozone, of things broken and things made whole again. Engines in various states of resurrection lined the walls on tables and hooks. A cot sat in the corner, military issue, thin mattress with one blanket. Owen gestured to it, then pointed to himself and shook his head, trying to mime that it was hers now, not his. The girl stood in the doorway, backlit by the amber light of the dying day. She did not step inside. Her eyes moved across the space with the calculation of something that had learned survival meant measuring every room for exits. Owen stepped back, giving her the width of the workshop between them. He sat on an overturned crate and pulled an engine manifold into his lap, making himself small, making himself busy, making himself safe. Minutes passed. The light outside shifted from amber to rust. Still, she stood. Owen worked with the steady rhythm of a man who had learned patience from machines that did not yield to hurry. He did not look at her directly, only in the periphery, the way you watch a wounded animal that might bolt. Finally, when the first stars pricked through the atmosphere's veil, she stepped inside. One step, then another. Her hand brushed the doorframe as if testing whether it would hold or crumble. She moved to the cot and sat on its edge, her weight barely denting the mattress. Owen rose slowly, crossed to a small cabinet, and pulled out a ration bar and a pouch of water. He set them on the floor halfway between them, then returned to his crate. The girl watched him with eyes that held no trust, but perhaps the faintest shadow of curiosity. She did not reach for the food. Not yet. Owen returned to his work, and the workshop filled with the small sounds of tools against metal, the language of fixing things that had been broken, the only language he knew well enough to speak without failing. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the distant hum of ships departing, leaving Outpost 7 behind like a bad memory. Inside, the girl finally reached for the ration bar, her fingers quick and careful, and ate in silence, so complete it felt like a held breath. The days acquired a rhythm built on gestures and careful distance. Owen woke before the suns climbed over the horizon, his body trained by years of solitary routine. He would find her already awake, sitting cross-legged on the cot, watching him with those enormous eyes that seemed to catalogue every movement he made. He learned to move slowly in the mornings, to let her see his hands before he reached for anything, to show her the food before he set it down. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face remained a mask of watchful neutrality that broke his heart in ways he could not name. On the third day, he brought her a jacket. Worn canvas with patches at the elbows, too large for her frame but warm. He held it out, and after a long moment, she took it. She did not put it on. She folded it precisely and set it beside the cot, like an artifact she was guarding rather than a gift she had received. The workshop became a stage for silent pantomime. Owen would gesture to ask if she was hungry, a hand to his mouth, a questioning tilt of his head. Sometimes she would nod, a movement so slight it barely qualified as acknowledgement. Other times, she simply stared until he set the food down anyway and returned to his work. He fixed a freighter's cooling system, rewired a smuggler's navigation array, rebuilt a hauler's thrust assembly. She watched everything, her gaze following the arc of his wrench, the spark of his welder, the careful way he coaxed broken things back into function. On the seventh night, Owen made a mistake born of exhaustion and forgetting. He dropped a heavy socket wrench, and it struck the concrete floor with a crack like thunder. He flinched, turned to apologize, and stopped. The girl had not moved, had not startled, had not even blinked. The sound that would have made him jump had passed through her like light through glass, leaving no mark, no recognition. The truth of her silence settled over him like weight, and he understood that her mother had not lied about this one terrible thing. He picked up the wrench slowly, set it on the workbench, and sat on his crate with his head in his hands. When he looked up, she was watching him with something new in her expression, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that he had finally seen what she lived inside of. A world without sound. A cage built of silence. Owen wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and returned to work, and the girl pulled the too large jacket around her shoulders for the first time, wrapping herself in something that might, if she let it, feel like kindness. The 14th night arrived with a stillness that felt like anticipation. The wind had died, unusual for Outpost 7, where the air moved with relentless hunger. Owen finished sealing a crack in a fuel line and wiped his hands on his permanent rag, the motions automatic, meditative. The girl sat on her cot, the jacket wrapped around her like armor, her eyes tracking the movement of his hands as they had every night before. He set his tools down and walked to the workshop door, pushing it open to let in the cooler air. The twin moons hung low and full, one silver, one pale gold, casting doubled shadows across the desert. Stars crowded the sky in numbers that Earth had forgotten, dense enough to read by if you knew their language. Owen stood in the doorway and felt the particular loneliness of a man who had grown accustomed to his own company, but had not grown to like it. Behind him, he heard the faint scrape of feet on concrete. The girl had risen. She moved to the doorway and stood beside him. Not close enough to touch, but closer than she had ever chosen to be. Together they looked at the sky, and Owen wondered what she saw, whether beauty translated across the gap between species, whether silence made the stars seem louder, or if they too were swallowed by the emptiness in her ears. He did not know how long they stood there. Time moved differently in stillness. But eventually the girl stepped past him, out onto the gravel, her bare feet pale against the dark ground. She walked 7 paces, then 10, then stopped. Owen's heart seized with the irrational fear that she was leaving, that she had finally decided his kindness was another trap. But she did not run. She turned her face upward, her mouth falling open slightly, her chest rising with a breath deeper than any he had seen her take, and then she sang. The sound that came from her throat was not human, not Archelian, not any species Owen had catalogued in his years, drifting through the galaxy's margins. It was crystalline, layered, a harmony produced by a single voice that should not have been able to divide itself into thirds and fifths. The notes climbed and twisted, building a melody that felt older than the stars it was offered to. A song without words but full of meaning he could not translate and could not ignore. Owen's legs went weak. He caught himself against the doorframe, his breath stopped in his chest. The girls sang, and the desert around them seemed to hold itself still. The very air thickening with attention, and for the first time since he had bought her, she was not silent. The song lasted 3 minutes or 3 hours. Time bent around it like light around gravity. When the final note dissolved into the night, the girl lowered her head and wrapped her arms around herself, swaying slightly as if the effort had pulled something vital from her core. Owen found his voice, though it came out ragged and uncertain. "How?" he said, knowing she could not hear him, needing to speak anyway. "How is this possible?" She turned, and for the first time since he had led her from the market, she looked directly into his eyes without flinching. Her expression was not defiant, not proud. It was exhausted, the exhaustion of someone who had carried a secret so heavy it had bent her spine. Owen crossed the gravel, each step deliberate, giving her time to retreat if she needed to. She did not move. He knelt before her, bringing himself to her height, and placed his hand over his own heart, then gestured to her. A question in the motion. The girl watched his hand, then slowly, carefully, reached out and placed her small palm against his chest. She felt the rhythm there, the steady percussion of a heartbeat. Her eyes widened slightly, not with surprise exactly, but with confirmation. Owen understood in a rush that made his vision blur. She could not hear sound, but she could feel it. The vibrations, the resonance. She had been listening to his workshop for 2 weeks through the soles of her feet, through the air against her skin, through the hum that traveled up from the ground. He stood and gestured for her to wait, then disappeared into the workshop. She remained in place, her arms still wrapped around herself, her breath visible in the cooling night. Owen returned with a handheld frequency scanner, a tool he used to diagnose engine tremors. He activated it and held it near her throat, watching the display as she swallowed, as she breathed. The readings spiked and cascaded, showing vibrations at ranges that should not exist in biological systems, frequencies that moved through spectrums human equipment barely registered. Owen's hands shook. He lowered the scanner and looked at her. Truly looked. Past the blue skin, and the 2 large eyes, and the fragile frame. "What are you?" he whispered. The girl did not answer, could not answer in words he would hear. But she lifted her hand and pointed skyward, to a constellation he did not recognize. Stars arranged in a pattern that resembled a broken crown or a half-closed fist. Then she pointed to herself, and finally to the ground beneath their feet. The gesture was clear enough. "I am from there. I am trapped here. I am something they do not understand." Owen felt the pieces arranging themselves into a picture he did not want to see. A child with abilities she had hidden. A mother who had called her defective, useless, worthless. The Arkelian woman arrived at dawn like a bill come due. Owen heard the transport before he saw it, the whine of cheap thrusters straining against gravity. He stepped out of the workshop, the girl behind him, her hand gripping the back of his jumpsuit with fingers that trembled. The ship settled in a cloud of dust, and when the ramp extended, the mother descended with 3 others at her back. Enforcers, their armor marked with the sigil of the Syndicate, the organization that ran Outpost 7, the way parasites ran a dying host. The mother's forearms gestured in a performance of maternal distress that would have been convincing if Owen had not seen her smile when she sold her daughter. "I have made a terrible mistake," she called, voice pitched to Carrie. "I was desperate, confused. I want my child returned." Owen felt the girl press against his back, her whole body rigid with fear. He stepped forward, putting himself between her and the approaching group. "The sale was legal," he said, his voice level despite the anger coiling in his gut. "You took my credits. She stays with me." The mother's face shifted, the mask of concern dropping to reveal something colder, sharper. "Legal," she repeated, tasting the word like spoiled meat. "You think law protects you here?" She gestured to the enforcers, and they fanned out, hands resting on weapons that hummed with readiness. Owen's mind raced through options, each one ending badly. He was one man with a wrench against 3 armed professionals. His workshop had no defenses, no escape routes he had not already catalogued and dismissed. One of the enforcers stepped forward, a Thraxian with mandibles that clicked impatiently. "Surrender the girl, and we leave peacefully. Refuse, and we take her anyway, and you meet the desert." Owen's hands curled into fists, knuckles white. The girl's grip on his jumpsuit tightened until he felt the fabric strain. He could fight and die here, accomplishing nothing. He could surrender her and live with the weight of that choice until it crushed him, or he could try the only card he had left, the truth that had kept him awake for 3 nights since she sang. "She is not what you think," Owen said slowly, his voice dropping to something quieter, more dangerous. The mother laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "She is defective, broken, worthless. That is why I sold her." Owen shook his head. "She is not deaf. She hears everything. And what she can do, what she sang 3 nights ago, is worth more than this entire outpost." The mother's laughter cut off. The enforcers shifted, glancing at each other. Owen pressed forward, gambling everything. "You sold a resonance singer for 200 credits. Do you know what the collective pays for one? What the Empire would offer?" Silence fell across the desert like a dropped curtain. The mother's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a terrible, dawning greed that made Owen's stomach turn. The mother's eyes narrowed to slits of violet calculation. "You lie," she said, but her voice wavered with the tremor of someone who suspected truth and feared missing fortune. "Resonance singers are myth, bedtime stories told to children. They died out 1,000 years ago." Owen felt the girl's hand release his jumpsuit, felt her step backward into the workshop's shadow. He held his ground, buying her seconds he hoped she would use to run, to hide, to do anything but stand where they could take her. "They are not myth," Owen said, his voice steady despite the hammer of his pulse. "And you threw one away because you never bothered to listen properly." The Thraxian enforcer clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement or threat. "If she is what you claim, prove it. Make her sing." Owen's jaw tightened. He turned his head slightly, enough to see the girl's silhouette against the workshop's interior light. She stood motionless, her eyes wide and locked on him, and he saw in them a question that broke him. "Do I trust you? Do I reveal myself to save you, or do I run and save myself?" He could not answer her. He could not hear her if she spoke, but he could choose, right now, what kind of man he was when the choice mattered most. He shook his head once, a small, deliberate motion meant for her alone. "You do not have to." he said quietly, knowing she might feel the words through the vibration of air if nothing else. "You owe them nothing," the mother shrieked, her composure fracturing. "She is mine, and I will take her whether she sings or not." The enforcers moved forward as one, weapons rising. Owen's hand dropped to his belt where a plasma cutter hung, a tool, not a weapon, but sharp enough to make his last stand matter. Before anyone could move further, the girl stepped into the light. She walked past Owen, her bare feet whispering against gravel, and positioned herself between all of them. Her hands hung at her sides, her chin lifted in a gesture that held no defiance, only resignation. She opened her mouth, and the song that emerged was different from the one she had given the stars. This one was sharp, discordant, a sound that made the enforcers stumble backward, their hands flying to their heads. The mother cried out, her forearms clutching at her skull as if trying to hold it together. Owen felt it too, a pressure building behind his eyes, a sensation like his bones were tuning forks struck too hard. The girl sang for 7 seconds, no more, and when she stopped, the Thraxian enforcer's weapon had clattered to the ground. The other two stood frozen, their faces slack with shock. The mother had fallen to her knees, violet blood trickling from her nose. The girl lowered her head, her shoulders shaking, and Owen realized she was crying, silent tears tracking down blue cheeks. The mother looked up, and the greed in her eyes had been replaced by something worse. Fear braided with recognition and poisoned with regret. The mother rose slowly, her legs unsteady, her forearms trembling as they pushed her upright. Blood still gleamed dark against her violet skin, and when she spoke, her voice had lost all its theatrical confidence. "What have I done?" she whispered, and the question seemed directed at herself rather than anyone present. The enforcers remained frozen, their professional composure shattered by a child's 7-second song. The Thraxian's weapon still lay in the dust, forgotten, irrelevant. Owen moved to the girl's side, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching, never touching without permission. She swayed slightly, her face pale even against blue skin, the song having drained something vital from her. He wanted to scoop her up, carry her inside, lock the door against the galaxy and its endless hunger. But the choice was not his to make. It had never been his. The mother took a step forward, and Owen's body tensed, ready to intercede. But the Arkelian woman raised one hand, palm out, a gesture of something that might have been surrender or supplication. "I did not know," the mother said, her voice cracking. "I thought her broken. I thought her a burden I could not carry." Owen's anger flared white-hot. "You did not try to know," he said, the words coming out harder than he intended. "You looked at what she could not do and never asked what she could." The mother flinched as if struck. And perhaps she had been, by truth delivered without mercy. She turned her gaze to the girl, and for the first time Owen saw something in those alien features that resembled genuine anguish. "I was afraid," the mother said. "When she was born, they told me she would never hear, never speak, never be whole. They told me to leave her in the desert, that it was mercy. I kept her, I fed her, I tried. But every day she reminded me of my failure, of what I could not fix. So I called her worthless until I believed it. And when I believed it, selling her felt like release." The girl did not look at her mother. She stared at the ground, her small frame shaking with exhaustion or emotion, or both. Owen felt something shift in his chest, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. He had seen enough of the galaxy's edges to know that cruelty often wore the face of desperation, that people broke under weights they had not chosen to carry. The Thraxian enforcer finally bent to retrieve his weapon, but he did not aim it. He looked at the girl with something approaching reverence. "If word of this spreads," he said quietly, "they will come for her. The collective, the empire, the cartels, everyone who knows the old stories. She will never be safe." The mother's face crumpled. Owen's hands curled into fists, and the girl, still silent, still watching the ground, reached out and took Owen's hand in hers. It was the first time she had initiated touch. Her fingers were small and cold and trembling, but they held on with a strength that spoke louder than any song. She had chosen. The mother saw it, her forearms wrapped around herself as if holding pieces together. "You will protect her?" she asked Owen. "Better than I did." Owen met her eyes. "I will die trying," he said. The mother nodded once, a motion that seemed to cost her everything. "Then take her far from here," she said. "Take her somewhere the stories cannot reach." She turned to the enforcers, her voice regaining a fraction of its former authority. "You saw nothing today. You heard nothing. If anyone asks, the girl died of fever 3 days after the sale." The Thraxian's mandibles clicked slowly, thoughtfully. "And what do we receive for this blindness?" The mother reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew a data chip, its surface etched with security clearances that made the enforcer's eyes widen. "Coordinates to a smuggler cache," she said. "Enough weapons to arm a small rebellion or sell for enough credits to retire. Your choice." The enforcers exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them in the language of mercenaries who had learned to weigh risk against reward with professional precision. The Thraxian took the chip, examined it, then pocketed it with a shrug that suggested he had seen stranger transactions. "The girl was never here," he said. "This workshop is empty. We are ghosts who forgot what we came for." The three of them turned and walked back to the transport without another word, their boots crunching gravel in rhythm. The ship lifted moments later, its thrusters kicking dust into spirals that caught the early light and turned it copper. Owen and the mother stood in the aftermath, the girl between them like a bridge neither could fully cross. The Arkelian woman knelt, bringing herself to her daughter's eye level for perhaps the first time in 12 years. She did not reach out to touch. She did not ask for forgiveness she had not earned. She simply looked. And in her 4 eyes, Owen saw the particular grief of someone recognizing beauty only after they had thrown it away. "I wish I had been braver," the mother said softly. "I wish I had loved you the way you needed, instead of resenting you for needing differently." The girl's face remained impassive, but her hand tightened around Owen's fingers. The mother rose, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone making a promise to herself rather than to anyone listening. "I will spread the story that you died. I will mourn loudly enough that no one questions it. And I will spend whatever time I have left wondering who you would have become if I had been worthy of raising you." She turned and walked toward the market, her 4 arms hanging limp at her sides, her shoulders curved with a burden that would not lighten with distance. Owen watched her go until she disappeared into the maze of stalls and tops. Then he looked down at the girl, whose enormous eyes were now fixed on his face with an intensity that felt like a question being asked in a language he was only beginning to learn. "We need to leave," he said, knowing she felt the urgency in his grip, in the tension of his body. "Today. Now. Before someone else remembers what resonant singers are worth." The girl nodded, a small, determined motion. Together they turned toward the workshop, toward the ship. Owen kept hidden beneath tarps and rust, toward a future neither of them could see, but both had chosen to face side by side. The ship Owen had kept hidden was older than most governments, and meaner than most weapons. A cargo hauler built for endurance rather than speed, its hull patched with mismatched plates that told the story of 1,000 near misses. He had bought it with money earned 1 repair at a time, planning someday to leave Outpost 7 behind. Someday had arrived with blue skin and silent tears. They launched at midday when the market noise was loudest, when one more ship departing would be swallowed by the chaos of commerce. The girl sat in the co-pilot seat, far too small for it, her feet dangling above the floor. She watched the controls with the same intensity she had watched his tools, cataloging, learning, preparing. Owen plotted a course toward the fringe colonies, settlements so far from imperial oversight that people asked fewer questions and answered even fewer. Places where a human mechanic and an alien child might disappear into the background noise of survival. The stars stretched around them as they jumped, light bending into tunnels that made his stomach clench and his vision blur. The girl pressed her hands against the console, feeling the vibrations of the engines, her mouth falling open in what might have been wonder. They found a settlement on a moon called Rust Harbor, a name earned by the orange dust that covered everything and the harbor that no longer held water. Owen rented a space in the industrial quarter, a workshop larger than his last, with living quarters attached that had a door separating work from rest. He hung a sign outside that read, "Repairs, no questions, fair prices." Within a week, they had their first customers. Within a month, they had a reputation. The girl learned to read schematics by watching Owen's hands trace circuits and connections. She learned to sort parts by size and function, creating an organizational system that made his chaotic approach seem barbaric by comparison. And every 7 days, when the settlement's lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, she would step outside and sing to the stars. Owen would stand in the doorway and listen, his chest aching with the beauty of it, with the trust it represented. Word spread in the way word always spread, through whispers and rumors and late-night conversations between people who dealt in secrets. A mechanic and a girl, a human and an alien, a workshop where broken things became whole. People came with more than engines to repair. They came with children who had been labeled different, defective, disappointing. They came asking if maybe, possibly, their child was not broken but simply misunderstood. Owen would look at these parents with eyes that had learned to measure worth differently. He would gesture to the girl, organizing parts with meticulous care, and he would say in a voice that carried the weight of a man who had bought mercy and received revolution, "Everyone hears something. You just have to learn their language." The girl never spoke in words Owen could hear, but she sang. She worked. She smiled occasionally, small expressions that felt like gifts. And every night before sleep, she would place her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, confirming he was still there, still solid, still the steady rhythm her world had been built upon. A father not by blood but by choice. A home not inherited but created. A silence filled with understanding, and that was louder than any word the galaxy had forgotten how to hear.